Thank you everyone for joining us for this Alumni Live Career Conversation as part of the Alumni Career Compass program from the University of Melbourne. The Career Compass program aims to demonstrate some of the benefits of being a part of the university's alumni community by giving recent graduates access to alumni who can share insights and advice based on their career journeys. My name is Maggie Liu. I am a member of the university's announcement team. And it's my pleasure to be joined online today by alumna Dr. Beth Jens. Welcome, Beth.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here today.
So a little bit about Beth. At age 12, Beth decided to become an astronaut, and now years later, she works as a propulsion engineer at the famous Jet Propulsion Laboratory, where the Mars rovers and much of NASA's early rocket technology were developed. She completed a combined Bachelor of Mechanical Engineering with honours and Bachelor of Science and Physics at the University of Melbourne in 2008. Her journey since then has included presenting her work at the world's largest space conference, attending the International Space University, followed by a master's degree and PhD at Stanford University. She also secured a coveted internship at the Jet Propulsion Lab, where she now works as a propulsion engineer. Thank you again for joining us, Beth. Let's move straight into some of the core questions we wanted to ask you today. Without further ado, can you firstly briefly describe your career journey and your current role?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start with my current role and then talk through how I got here. So I'm a propulsion and systems engineer at JPL, which is the NASA center that focuses on the robotic exploration of the solar system. So each NASA center tends to have one main area that they focus on. And from very early on, I fell in love with JPL because they did a lot of the missions that have taught us most of what we know about the other planets in our solar system. So I got really excited by the Cassini mission and then found out, that was, JPL, and then the Mars rovers are all JPL. And as I studied, I came to love propulsion and then got to know the propulsion group here. And now I'm working in that role. I also am a systems engineer on the next NASA Mars rover. So I have a little bit of hardware that's going to be sitting on the rover's arm. It's currently sitting on the rover's arm, except that it's currently on Earth. And in not too long, we'll be heading off to Mars. So it'll be exciting to see that operating on the surface of Mars. So I, as you mentioned, started wanting to work in this field because I fell in love with the idea of becoming an astronaut and really more broadly helping our species explore. So I think that transition to then really deciding that I wanted to work at a place like JPL was pretty natural because it was this idea of how can I help humanity explore? How can we learn more about our solar system and our place in it? The search for, is there life outside of Earth? And this is the type of place where there's lots of people who are excited about those types of questions and are actively looking to see how we might answer them. So it was, relatively easy for me to decide what I wanted to do. And I appreciate that I'm lucky in that sense because it's not the case for everybody. But it was very challenging at the time to work out how to go from an undergraduate engineer at Melbourne University to a role in a place like NASA. And I definitely reached out to lots of different people to ask for advice along the way. I'll give the quick high-level summary, and then if there's questions or you want more details on certain steps, then we can talk through it a bit more. But one thing I did want to really highlight is that, I wanted this for a long time, and there were many points where I couldn't work out how I was going to get here. And now there's a lot more resources for young Australians wanting to work in the space industry, both domestically and abroad. So hopefully, for folks listening, it's going to be a lot easier for you now looking for a career in the space industry. So I started out by just going to a whole lot of different conferences within Australia and then eventually also abroad and asking for advice and looking at what paths different people have taken to join the space industry. And then also to get a feel for whether I really like the industry beyond, the idea of it, whether day to day I would enjoy working as an engineer for a company like NASA or an institution like NASA. And thankfully, the answer was yes, I do enjoy it and continued to enjoy it. I decided at the end of my undergraduate study that I wanted to pursue more study, but that I wasn't ready for a research PhD. I felt that I had a lot more learning that I wanted to do of the basics And so I really looked into doing master's courses in advanced, aerospace fields, or even continuing the mechanical engineering degree that I had done. And so that kind of led me, since I wanted to do space exploration, that led me to looking at the US. So I applied exclusively to US institutions, and I also applied to International Space University. From there, I got accepted to the International Space University's summer program, which was a 2-month program. And I also got accepted to a couple of US universities, including Stanford. I decided that I wanted to follow up on Stanford and then learn how expensive US education is. So I actually took a while before I started full-time at Stanford. I ended up deferring my start date so that I could get funding organised, and I ended up getting a Fulbright scholarship as well as a Rotary Ambassadorial scholarship. And with that, after a year and a half had passed from when I graduated from undergrad, I started at Stanford University to do my Masters in Aeronautics and Astronautics. As you mentioned, from there, I continued into a PhD, and during my Masters and then the PhD, I interned a number of times with JPL and ultimately ended up working here full-time. So as soon as I finished, I essentially was told by JPL to hurry up and finish my PhD and get down here. I was enjoying researching and being a graduate student, but thankfully also enjoy the job. So yeah, I've now been at JPL full-time for a few years, working on propulsion, looking especially at propulsion for very small spacecraft. And since it's JPL, we're generally looking at whether we can send those spacecraft to other planets. And then also looking at working on this small system that's going to be on the rover's arm. So it's been taking up a lot of my time over the last few years.
I think that's incredible that you've had this journey to where you are, where you're able to send your work out into other planets, as you say, and it sounds like you've had incredible opportunities along the way. So something I was curious to ask you about next, Beth, is I guess, what are some of the challenges along the way that you've had to overcome, and how would you advise recent graduates to avoid or manage similar challenges?
So there's been a number, I think, of challenges. I think most of them really center around the odds for a foreign national getting a job, especially in the US and especially in propulsion, which can have military applications, can be very challenging. So the US has the International Traffic in Arms Regulations, which often restrict a lot of the roles like what I do to US persons only. So people holding a US green card or holding a US passport. Now, I had neither of those things, so it is not impossible for a foreign national to overcome those challenges. But if you were to talk to people or look at most online applications, you would see very explicit writing, lines saying for US persons only for this job application. And when you talk to people, they'll often say, oh, look, we're only accepting resumes from US persons. And so that was a fairly large challenge. And I think one thing I would say in general is to not be dissuaded by long odds if it's something that you're really passionate about, and more importantly, if it's something that you're willing to work hard for. I guess I had to be willing to come over here and try to make a career of this and potentially fail. So that I knew that the chances of everything working out were slim. And I had to be at peace with the knowledge that, okay, if it didn't work out, was I still happy with the decisions I'd made and the experiences I'd gained along the way? So if I got my PhD from Stanford and then still had to return to Australia and maybe not work in the space industry if there weren't roles available, would I still be happy with, having done that? And I know it's not maybe true for everybody, but I was also pretty stubborn. And so you can encounter various forms of people doubting you, or, sometimes I look young and so have people underestimate me fairly often. And so having a bit of a thick skin and also being pretty determined and confident in what I'm bringing to the table and also aware of what I'm not bringing to the table, I think has made a big difference.
Okay, I guess it's probably going to cover on some of the similar things that you just mentioned, but I guess as you said, the odds were very slim for someone, a recent grad in Australia who's looking to mimic sort of a similar pathway that you've been able to have. What advice would you give them to better their odds of success?
Well, very similar, I'd say. If it's something that you're passionate about, then don't be afraid to verbalize it and ask for help. I got help from all sorts of unexpected quarters. My Rotary scholarship, which allowed me to defer the Stanford degree, I got that through my boss at the sushi shop in Torquay, where I was working at the time. I was upset one day very frustrated with myself that I hadn't looked into scholarship applications before applying to US institutions, and then found out that most of them had closed. And my boss said, oh, surely we can find a way to work this out. Stop being so glum, essentially. And I was very doubtful. And the next day she came in and said, oh, I spoke to my father, and it just so happens that he's involved with Rotary and they have this scholarship and you'd need to apply, but maybe you could give that a shot. And so help can come from the most unexpected quarters. I think also be aware that help is not just going to drop out of the sky, and things won't just fall into place without a bit of hard work on your part. And it's not hard work for a day or a test. It's, being willing to say, okay, well, in 5 or 10 or 20 years' time, I want to be in this position. So what steps can I take today to work towards that? And then, having the gumption to follow through on that.
Yeah, that's really good advice. In terms of drawing on your network, there's people that you work for in sushi shops, there's you moving to America and having to form new networks. Do you have any tips on, networking? How do you form a network in, when you first started in your career, and how do you continue to build your network now?
Yeah, this is hard because I think so many of us hate this idea of, oh, I'm building a network. Is that making me fake? What does that mean? And yet your network becomes such a huge part of your career from the start all the way through. And I think it goes beyond just a superficial interaction to genuine friendships and respect from your interactions with various people. One thing I would say is that just really acknowledging that at the start of your career, it's hard. And I think it's hard for everybody. I've never had, thankfully, or luckily for me, I haven't had confidence issues, but I still found it incredibly intimidating when I'd show up to a space conference not knowing anybody and walk into a room where everyone else seems to know everyone, and you just have to walk up to strangers and try to introduce yourself and start talking. And particularly, I think when you're early in your career and you're worried that you don't have much to add, that can be hard, but it's amazing how help and advice and friendships can come out of the most unexpected quarters. And what is really hard the first time will get a little bit easier the next time when you recognize one of those faces. And then also acknowledging that, there'll be times where maybe you don't do the best job of it, but I think as long as you try, it's worth not, there's never really regret for an attempt that failed. There's regret for not really attempting it.
Is there any, standard questions you'd gravitate to, or techniques for navigating a networking situation, while you're there?
That's a good question. It's not something I've thought of recently. I guess I really like it now when people come up, if they want to chat and talk about, get advice or ask for opportunities. It's really nice when there's specific questions. And if they also have done enough research for me to know that they're really passionate. So, I'll get sometimes emails out of the blue, and if it's just someone asking for a generic question that they could Google, it's much less motivating for me to sit and spend the time to reply to that when I'm like, hey, Google it. But it's really wonderful when someone truly passionate reaches out and says, hey, here's a bit of background on what I'm doing, and this is the specific question I had for you, and could you maybe help me out with that? And I think that tends to make me more likely to respond now. And I know that, I've been very grateful for the advice I've gotten from people. I was having a real dilemma at the end of my master's about whether I should continue studies in the US or return to Australia for my PhD. Particularly after doing the Fulbright program, I felt more obligated to go home, and I was trying to work out whether I could best contribute to Australia from abroad or domestically, and then also personally what was the best move. And I reached out blind to Dr. Andy Thomas, our astronaut, and was amazed that within moments he had replied with his phone number saying, give me a call and let's talk through it. But I think what helped is not just that it was an email out of the blue, but I sort of laid out, hey, here's all the things I've done, and here's my specific question that I'm really wrestling with now. And I think that can be very helpful to direct conversations to be, one, useful, but also to get people engaged.
I think that's definitely a mistake that lots of young grads fall in, and something certainly I've done before, where you're there and you're like, oh my gosh, you're so incredible. Can you just help me? But not have an idea of what exactly you want help in. So
and I think it's often, it's so vague, it's so hard to answer. Oh, can you help? Or people will often ask, oh, how do I get your position? And that is not just a 5-second answer. That's quite a long, in-depth path,
career compass session.
yeah, exactly. and often it can be so different. There's so much luck that's involved and so many different twists and turns. It's often much easier if it's like, oh, I'm really wrestling with this specific question. Would you have advice if you're in my shoes?
Yeah, awesome. Something else that I did want to ask you is you work in the US. How has working internationally influenced your career and yourself?
I've gotten much more used to plane trips, but I think in general, I've been blown away by the amount of opportunities that I've had here. And I really want to highlight the fact that domestically, there's so many opportunities opening up right now in the space sector within Australia. So I think it's really important to emphasize the fact that people should really be looking domestically, not just thinking they need to move overseas to have a meaningful career in this sector now. And that's something that I would have killed for at the time. I love Australia, and I wasn't leaving because I wasn't happy at home. I really left because I was passionate about this career and wanted to pursue it. So one thing especially I have appreciated in the role that I'm in now, and then also my time in Silicon Valley and graduate school, was feeling like I was at the center of things a little bit, and that opportunities would just come out of nowhere and kind of take my breath away. So whether it's been, requests to speak at various conferences or requests to become an author of a textbook or, just new roles at work, I've been blown away by the types of things that will often come seemingly out of the blue. It's one random conversation might then boil away in the background between other people, and suddenly it'll come back with something that I would never have imagined could have been an opportunity for me. And so I've really loved that. I think this feeling of, because there's so many things happening all around where I am, suddenly opportunities will just, appear. And so whether it's joining organizing committees for, big propulsion conferences or being involved with organizing those same conferences that I used to kill just to attend, and now being someone who's helping shape the future of them. So that's something I've really liked. And also obviously the diversity of the interactions you can have with various people can add a lot of interest. And then one thing that I need to remind myself not to underestimate is how helpful it can be in some ways being foreign in an area that doesn't have that many foreigners, in that you become more memorable, which can be something very hard early in your career to achieve. And so, I guess I've been lucky in that once I got here, people remember me as, oh, you're the Australian. And I remember the work you did on X as a result. And so that's been helpful.
Yeah, well, you haven't lost your accent since, so I'm sure you're still known as the Australian in the office. Something else I did want to ask as well is, well, you've personally, Beth, really known that you were interested in space, wanted to be an astronaut since you were 12. For graduates and recent alum who might not really know how they can best apply their skills, do you have any advice on how they can figure out how to apply their skills to their fields?
Yeah, I think we all have moments where we get confused and are trying to work that out and really get a feel for what we enjoy and what we don't. I think being willing to try out different roles and then acknowledging to ourselves if they're not the right fit is important. So I worked in management consulting when I was in Australia and really enjoyed the people I was working with. But a pretty clear indication to me that that was not what I should be doing forever was the fact that on my flights to and from Sydney for work, I was pulling out this Open University math questions and would sit and work through them. And so if I'm doing that in my spare time at work, it's probably an indication that I'm not doing the work that long term I was going to find fulfilling because I wasn't applying that skill set day to day. So the other thing is, I guess if we're looking at it from the space sector, is remembering that there's a variety of skill sets that can be applied to this sector. We think of, engineers or maybe geologists or scientists, and yet, we work with really talented media folks who are looking to get the message out about current efforts in space exploration and doing really wonderful, meaningful things for our community in that role. Or there's folks in the business department working here. And so if you have a field you're passionate about, it's worth looking beneath the hood and making sure that, you can't seeing whether you could carve out a role that would suit your skill set and your passions together.
Awesome. Final question before we moved on to some audience submitted questions. Do you mind sharing what your top 3 tips might be for making it?
Yeah, so I have touched on these a little bit already, but my 3 tips for making it, and I hate to sound preachy here, but the first obviously is follow your passions. I think if you're lucky enough to know what you're passionate about, then really look at how you can carve out a career in that field. and be willing to work hard, which is number 2, to follow through on it. And as I said earlier, really make sure that you're planning more for a long-term campaign than an overnight campaign. So for those, I love Hugh Jackman, and for those who've heard him speak, he talks about how he personally had like a 5-year goal for anything that he set out to do. It was not, oh, I want to make it in film and I expect to get a role next year. It was, I'll give myself 5 years and see whether this works out. And I think that's a really good mentality to take for everybody. You know, if you decide at 12 years old you want to be an astronaut, well, when you turn 13, you're not going to be sent to space. If you're lucky, you might be in your 30s, maybe your 40s, maybe even older. And so it's really having the, I guess, sustained drive to see through these long, lofty goals and stay passionate about it the whole time. Yeah. So they would be my 3 tips. Work hard, plan long term, and follow your passion.
Great. Awesome tips for everyone to take on. So moving into some of the questions that our audience members submitted in advance. Thank you so much. The first one I had is from Harry, and he wanted to know, Beth, how do you balance your personal ambitions with career ambitions and also the expectations of the industry on yourself?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, you know, it's something that I've struggled with, particularly as I can get caught up with nitty-gritty details about something I'm working on, and then you stop and reflect on it and you think, hey, maybe this problem isn't even really in line with what I want to be doing long term. And maybe this isn't even as much of an issue as I thought it was. You know, does solving this get me where I want to be, or is this just something that I'm allowing myself to be caught up in? So, you know, whether that's helping resolve conflicts between other team members or diving into technical detail where maybe it's better suited to someone else to analyze. One thing I try to do is make sure I'm doing work that I'm still excited about. So, of course, we all have roles where we just have to put our head down and push through it. And we're going to be doing work sometimes that is not the most thrilling every day. But, you know, when I take a step back and look at the bigger picture of what I'm doing, is it something that I still really want to continue to do? Do I feel like I'm adding value to this process? So not just am I personally learning every day, because that's not always going to happen, but am I able to add value, and can I strike the balance between the days where I get to sit and learn and maybe not add as much value, and the days where I can add a lot of value but maybe not get to learn as much. I'm just churning through things that I've done previously. So I try to strike that balance so that I can balance my ambitions with, you know, what is also of the best value for the institution, which in this case for me is contributing to NASA and contributing to JPL.
Awesome. And you sort of touched on this before in terms of the difficulty of getting there, but Faraz wanted, I guess, to get your overall opinion on how hard/competitive is it actually to join and work at NASA currently in 2019?
It's hard, and I don't want to sugarcoat that, but I guess by virtue of the fact I'm sitting here talking, it's not impossible. And I used to think to myself, I just need one yes. So in all my years of trying, I just need one yes. And I'm going to live through however many no's it takes to get the yes. So I guess just to briefly again touch on some of the challenges, the reason is it's not easy. One, there's a lot of people who are also excited about space. So obviously there's a large pool of people who are passionate about working in this field. But I think more so than that, because of being foreign, there's also this added challenge of how do I even get my resume in the right person's hand to start this journey? I might have all the skills in the world, but if I can't even apply, how is anyone going to know that? And sitting back and hoping that someone's going to notice you isn't going to work in this case. You really need to be proactive about going out and talking to people. There's also a fair bit of luck with timing in that, you know, a lot of the NASA centers will go through phases where they're, for programmatic reasons that might be on a multi-year time frame and have absolutely nothing to do with the individual area or how much research is going on in that field. There might be, you know, just a broad hiring freeze for one of the centers. And so you might be super talented. You might have interned there. You might have a team that loves you, and they still might be stuck with their hands tied saying, look, we really can't bring you on this year and we don't know when we're going to be able to. So I think, yeah, I don't want to sugarcoat the fact that it's hard, but I do want to highlight the fact that there are opportunities. So it's not impossible. And there's some great programs to get exposure to NASA centers, like through the NASA postdoc program that is open to foreign nationals to apply. And that's one great door to get your foot your foot in the door here and get a feel for whether this, whether the organisation you go to might be the type of organisation that you'd want to work at long term, and then also to get a feel for whether there might be opportunities that would align with your skill set.
Great. That's really, really helpful. I think it's great how you didn't sugarcoat it and I guess really spelled out the work that it's taken to get to where you are. Beth, one final question for you. Did you have any final words of wisdom you wanted to leave our alumni with today?
Yeah, it was funny. I was thinking about, what I really wanted to highlight, but I think so much of it now we've ended up covering as we're talking. I really would just want to highlight the fact that for those listening, if they have a goal that they want to achieve, they should go for it. I think it's so easy to be self-limiting and think, oh, I would love to do that, but, it's so unlikely. It's easy to get talked out of. I think as Australians, we can be wonderfully supportive when we get behind people, but we also suffer from tall poppy syndrome, and it can be easy to have someone cut you down without even realizing they're doing it, and to be sort of dissuaded from something you might actually be really passionate about. So I really would want to highlight that if you have some dream, whatever field it might be or whatever it might be to do, whether it's go off and take time and travel the world or to pursue a career like this that requires a lot of study and time, then really give it a shot. You only need one yes. So apply for everything, have a thick skin and be willing to accept the no's if it means you're on the path to getting a yes.
Great. That's one of the key pieces of advice I've gotten before as well. There's so many external factors that can sort of say no to you and shut you down. You really don't want yourself to be one of those factors as well. So thank you again, Beth. But it's time for us to wrap up now. So before we finish, I'd like to encourage our alumni to consider sharing the insights from your own career journeys with our current students through the Us Alumni Mentoring Program. Our online program allows students to reach out to alumni to have one-off 30-minute conversations over the phone, a video conference, or in person, so it's convenient for anyone from around the world to be a mentor. Your advice and support can help give current students the best start to their career. Beth, it has been so fantastic to talk to you today and learn more about your career, and I'm sure our alumni have benefited from your insights. On behalf of everyone who's here, I'd like to offer my sincere thanks. Thank you so much for giving up some of your time to share these insights and advice today.
It's been my pleasure.
Goodbye, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today.